Perspektives. How you think powers your mental views, your actions, and your ultimate reality. Join me, Emmanuel Utomi, every Sunday from 8:30 to 9 p.m. on PRZ 109.2 FM London as we explore how to live your best life possible. Perspektives. How you think.
A very good evening to you, my dear listeners out there. And yes, once again, what you have just heard was the very first jingle for Perspektives. So, as you would realize that, you know what, let's just put that beside me. I'd like to say a very good evening to you. Thank you for joining me and sharing your evening with me today. You are welcome to the Prayer Rally Zone, PRZ 109.2 FM. And this is Perspektives, the show that is designed to take you one step closer to a better life. And I'm your host, Emmanuel Utomi. If you are living in the UK, I'd like to say a very happy bank holiday to you. I hope you've had a very beautiful day. It's been sunny, the weather has been good, and I know loads and loads of you would have enjoyed the extended weekend bank holiday. So thank you for sharing your evening with me. It promises to be a lovely evening. As you are aware, if you would like to be a part of Perspektives, you'd like to share a comment, you have a question, or there's a topic of interest that you would want us to discuss today or at any other time on Perspektives, please, you can join in. You can send your messages to me. You can send it through email, you can send a tweet, or you could send a text. If you're sending emails, the address to use is perspektives@przfm.com. That's perspektives@przfm.com. Or you could send a tweet at Perspektives, and I'll be more than happy to read out your tweets or your emails live on air. And for those who have been sending out their messages, questions, comments and contributions, I'd like to say a very, very big thank you to you. You have been part of this program, and I'd like to say a very big thank you. Please continue to send those contributions. They make a world of difference to the program. Some of those contributions and questions have formed the basis of some of the discussions we've had over the past few months. So please continually send them. Like I said, once again, the email address to send your questions or comments to is perspektives@przfm.com, or send a tweet at Perspektives. And Perspektives is spelled as PASPEKTIVES. That's PASPEKTIVES. Or you could send a text. You could send your text to 0757 260 5435, and I'll be more than happy, like I said, to read out your message and your comments live on air. I would like to remind those of you that are listening to me that Perspektives is designed to encourage you to question how you think. It is also here to help you develop the habit of thinking differently, as well as to get you to develop a progressive and a solution-based mindset. So please do enjoy yourself. Sit back, relax. One of the listeners told me that every time Perspektives comes on air, she always listens with a notepad and a pen. Thank you very much for that feedback. It is very encouraging. And so please, if you have the time, go get a notepad and a pen, because I guarantee you are going to be hearing a few things that will definitely transform your lives if you're willing to put them to practice. Also, if you're not able to write, you can actually listen to these broadcasts over and over again, particularly not just this broadcast, but broadcast of all the other presenters on the Prayer Rally Zone. If you do not already have the SoundCloud software downloaded on your phone, the app on your phone or your mobile device, please do download the SoundCloud, and you can log on to the PRZ FM Africa. That's the PRZ FM Africa account, and not only can you listen to the broadcast, but you will also be able to download the broadcast and listen to them over and over again. I'd like to apologize, which was what I was going to do earlier, to apologize that for last week we were unable to run a live broadcast due to some technical problems. But we are back on air today, and you are listening to a live broadcast. So far this month, we have been looking at the topic of resourcefulness. And today is the last week of this month, and we're going to be rounding up, hopefully, the topic that we started a few weeks ago. So far, we have looked at why is there a need to be resourceful. We've also talked about what it means to be resourceful. So what I'd like to do is to do a brief recap of some of the things we've discussed in the past few weeks, and then we'll move on to what we want to talk about this week. We started out with looking at why is there a need to be resourceful, and we said that, look, at the heart of this question of resourcefulness is actually what we all know as the law of demand and supply. And one of the laws of demand and supply boils down to the fact that the needs of the average human being are unlimited. Meanwhile, the supply of those needs are limited. But in our case, when we're looking at it in relation to resourcefulness, we're saying that as a human being, you will consistently and constantly be in need of one thing or the other. However, the resources at your disposal, the capacity to satisfy these needs will be or could be limited in some way, shape, or form. Now, it is in the bid to bridge this gap of our desires and meeting those desires that the issue of being resourceful, of resourcefulness, comes into play. So we therefore need to find ways of satisfying our endless needs with the limited resources that we have. And that is why we feel it is important to discuss the issue of resourcefulness. Then we looked at, well, what does it mean to be resourceful? What exactly does it mean to be resourceful? And we did say that being resourceful is having the ability to find a quick and clever way to overcome difficulties. That's one of the ways of defining what it means to be resourceful. Right? When you as an individual find yourself in a situation or having a need that you need to, a situation that you need to deal with, or a need that is pressing on you, having the ability to find a quick and clever way to overcome these difficulties is one of the ways of being resourceful. So if you're able to when you find people who have come upon or put forward creative ways of handling these difficulties, we say those people, or we classify those people as being resourceful. We also said that being resourceful is the ability to act effectively and imaginatively, especially, again, in a difficult or tricky situation. Resourcefulness could also be the ability to see the relationship between seemingly ordinary things, looking at two things in an entirely different way, as opposed to the relationship that they ordinarily have. So that is one other way of being resourceful, that you're seeing a new way of putting a particular item to use, or a new, maybe not necessarily a new way, but an alternative way. Yeah, I could use that, of putting a particular item or situation to use. That could be another way of defining what it means to be resourceful. It is also being able to look at the rubbish, or to take the rubbish that people discard or chuck out, and you take those rubbish and you work on them, and you get them into, you transform them into something entirely new, something entirely different, and you turn them into something entirely different in such a way that the same people who chucked those things out now come to you to pay to buy those things. At a global scale, it's like taking crude oil and refining it and getting petroleum. And of course, when you look at the comparison between developed countries and developing countries, you see where one country has access to crude oil in its natural state, but they're not able to transform it, but they now sell that crude oil to another country who is able to process that crude oil, make it into petroleum and other petroleum-based products, and then ship this product back into those countries where they got the crude oil from, and get the people or the government of that country to now pay them probably twice as much for the refined materials that they took from them. This is part of being resourceful. It is taking old clothes that people have discarded and maybe even ripping them and putting them back on the market and getting people to pay a bit more for them. I mean, look at the jeans of these days. We now pay much more for ripped jeans that we pay for the normal jeans. And there was a joke I made with a friend of mine that, you know what basically happened was that this jeans got old, but the owner wasn't willing to discard it, and someone said, you know what, I'm going to wear it anyway. And it became fashion. It became a fashion trend. So that's it. Those are ways of being resourceful. Generally speaking, being resourceful is actually living a lifestyle that is much more productive and much more rewarding. When you decide to live a lifestyle that is much more productive and much more rewarding, you decide to draw out more reward, much more result out of the 24 hours that you have, out of the situations that you find yourself. When you decide to yourself that the results that you're getting, that they are not enough, that somewhere on your inside you're saying, I can get more out of the time I have at my disposal. I can get more from the tools that I have. Being resourceful is taking your same mobile phone, and instead of watching YouTube, you record yourself with that same phone and uploading a video of yours on YouTube, and people pay you for watching that video. Come on, that is what it means to be resourceful. It's looking at the same things that you do over and over again and asking yourself, how else can I do it? What else can I do with this? How else can I be much more productive? How else can I draw much more reward from the same situations and circumstances that I go through, that I experience on a daily basis? So that is what we've discussed so far in terms of being resourceful and resourcefulness. You are listening to the Prayer Rallies on PRZ 109.2 FM, and my name is Emmanuel Utomi. You are on to Paspektives, the show that is designed to take you one step closer to a better life. Last week also, we picked an example from the Bible that I'd like to do a quick recap on also. We looked at the story, a story in the Bible from the book of 2 Kings chapter 4 from verses 1 to 7, and it was basically the story of a widow. This woman was married to a prophet and they had 2 sons, but what had happened was that the prophet had died, and now the creditor had come to take the 2 sons to work as slaves to pay off their father's debt. And what the woman decided to do was to run to Elisha and to report the case to Elisha. And she said to Elisha, look, my husband, your servant, is dead. And you know he loved God. But you know what? The creditors have come to take away my 2 sons to serve as slaves. I need your help. And Elisha's question was very simple. What do you have at home? And initially the woman said nothing. But then she turned around and said, oh, but I do have a small jar of oil. One translation says, I have a small jar of olive oil. And Elisha said, you know what? This is what you're going to do. I want you to go back home and go throughout your neighborhood and talk to your neighbors and borrow drums, borrow other jars, borrow empty jars, borrow containers. And when you have borrowed all these containers from your neighbors, take them into your house, lock your door, and then start pouring from your little jar of olive oil into the empty jars. And the woman, in simple obedience and simple childlike obedience, went back home, went through her neighbors, borrowed as many barrels or as many jars as she could, and went home and did exactly what the prophet said. And the Bible says as she started to pour, every single jar was filled until there were no more jars to fill with oil. And that was when the oil stopped running from her little jar. And then she went back to the prophet and said to the prophet, I have done what you have asked me to do. Now what do I do next? Then the prophet looked at her and said, you know what? Go away, sell what you have, pay off your debt, and learn, that's my addition, learn to live on what is left. So what you have is a story where the woman was able to find the right person to talk to that will help her get out of her situation. You know, one of the traits of being resourceful is knowing the right place to go for help. And in the case of this woman, she knew exactly where to go for help. Sometimes we go to every other place for help outside the actual place that we will go to get our problems resolved. Sometimes we go to places out of experience, out of memory, out of emotions. If we do all those things and we go to all those places and they are not helpful, then we are not being productive with our use of resources. This woman knew where to go to for help. Not only did she know where to go to, she knew the exact person to speak to. That is another trait of being resourceful. Knowing that, yes, I will be or I will find myself in difficult situations. However, I have an idea of who to speak to that will give me the right counsel or that will give me the right insight on what to do or what not to do or what to do more of or what to do less of in order to help me get the results that I need. That in itself is being resourceful. One other trait of being resourceful is knowing what to do. But not just knowing what to do, but it's actually going ahead to do it. Anthony Robbins once said that the challenge that most of us face is not that we do not know what to do, but it's not that we do not know what to do, but it's that we do not do what we know. It is one thing to know the right steps to take to get yourself out of a situation. It is one thing to read the books, to gather the resources, to have the materials, to know what to do, to get all the information. But it is an entirely different case altogether in now putting the action that you know into practice. Until you put those things that you have learned, that you've been informed about, that you know, until you put them into practice, you are not maximizing the resources at your disposal. One other trait of being resourceful is knowing the right questions to ask when you have a need or when you find yourself in a difficult situation. You know what? Let the results that you intend to achieve be the guiding principle, be the guide to how or what questions you would ask given a particular situation. Sometimes people find themselves in a difficult situation and they end up asking questions like, why is this happening to me? My question to you is this: if you get the answer to that question, what difference would it make? There are times when people have asked me questions, or people have pushed me to ask questions, and I've asked myself, what difference would the answer to this question make to the situation within which I find myself? And over the years, I have decided that if the answer to a question or the answer to the question I'm about to ask will not in any way, shape, or form help me get out of the situation I find myself, if the answer I am going to get to the question that I am going to ask, if I realize that it will not bring about any form of improvement in how and where I find myself, then this is my conclusion: that question is not worth asking. Being resourceful is knowing the right question to ask. That's one of the traits. The last trait that I'm going to share with you for being resourceful is that it is one of this trait is about identifying the right answer for your situation. So sometimes you've asked a question, and there are people that you would ask questions from, and you know that they will go on and on and on and talk about several things and different things and why they would just go on and on. And my question to you is this: if the answer they're giving you is not meeting your needs, you need to learn to either ask them that question again, or to sift through the bundle of answers that you have received and identify what part of those answers that you have received addresses the issues that you need addressing. And you just take those bits out and discard the rest. That is one other way. That is one other trait of being resourceful. So these are the things we've discussed in the weeks past. So this week we will be discussing how to be resourceful. So as I said earlier, so far we have considered why there is a need to be resourceful and what it means to be resourceful. And we've also looked at some of the traits of being resourceful. So as we go into today, looking at how to be resourceful, I'd like to share a story with us. And it's a story about a young poor boy who came across a dead mouse lying in the road. And he wondered how he might turn the mouse or the mouse's misfortune into some sort of opportunity for himself. So what he did was to pick up the mouse and he brought it with him to a tavern, where he offered it to the tavern keeper to feed his cat. Of course, the tavern keeper was grateful and gave the boy just 1 penny. And the boy was grateful and went his merry way. But what the boy did was what struck me. You see, with this penny, the boy went to the market and bought a very small amount of honey. Then he borrowed a large water pot, filled it with water, and carried it into the fields where he knew there were some women picking flowers. You know, it was a hot day, and what he did was to offer the flower pickers a drink of water, each with a drop of honey in it to make it sweet and refreshing. And of course, you know, the flower pickers were very grateful and each gave this small boy a handful of flowers. And the small boy looked at those flowers and decided he would sell this in the market. And as he sold the flowers in the market, he, of course, got a handful of pennies. Soon afterwards, what happened was that a storm blew in that town, and with it brought with it a mighty wind that blew down a large number of twigs and branches from the trees of the king's pleasure garden. And this confused the king's gardener, because what he did was he was scratching his head, wondering how he would clean it all up. And it was while the king's garden keeper was thinking about all this, that the boy popped up and offered to clean up the entire mess in one day, but on one condition. And the condition was that if he cleaned it up, that the garden keeper would allow him keep the wood he had collected. Of course, to the gardener, this was a no-brainer. He agreed on the spot, and of course, to great relief, because he didn't have to scoop everything on his own. He didn't have to figure out how to clear the shrubs and the wood. So here's what that small clever boy did. He went immediately to the playground and offered the boys playing there a penny each to help him gather up the woods and pile those woods beside the road. And of course, little boys, they were very happy to do so and had the task done in little or no time. And just as the small boys were piling the wood, the last piece of wood by the side of the road, along came a porter who walked nearby, who was looking for fuel to fire his clay pots in his kiln. The boy offered him the piles of wood, and of course the porter was delighted, as he did not have to scavenge wood himself in the forest. He rewarded the boy handsomely with a handful of money and several large water pots. Meanwhile, the boy did something very interesting. The boy went back to that tavern and befriended both a merchant and a sea captain. Now, from the merchant, he learned that a large caravan with 500 horses were due to arrive in the village very soon. So, using the money he got from the porter, he hired some wagons, loaded his new water pots on them, and filled them with water. He also was able to buy some honey, which he mixed with the water, just as he did before. And you know what? This was the season for taking hay, and at least 500 men were toiling in the fields cutting grass. The boy brought the water to the packed field hands, and in return, each gave him a bundle of grass, because the boy refused to accept money. He just wanted the grass that the field hands were cutting. And what he did was interesting. He gathered all the grass onto the wagon and brought it to the gate of the city, and there he was to greet the caravan just as they arrived. You see, the traders had crossed many miles of barren country on their journey, and their horses were famished. So they gladly purchased the small boy's entire stock of grass, giving him in return for their goods, a fine set of clothing, a fine tent, and a large jeweled ring. What the boy did next was very interesting. The boy went back to the tavern where he learned from his sea captain friend that a ship was due in port with a rich cargo from foreign lands, and he hatched a very beautiful plan. Now, putting on the fine clothing and the jeweled ring, the one that he had taken from the caravan, he had enough. He also remembered that he had enough coins left to hire an expensive looking carriage and a driver for just an hour. So he drove down to the shore to meet the ship as soon as it arrived. And with all the appearances of being the son of a very wealthy merchant, he said his father had, he approached the captain of the ship and said his father had instructed him to buy the entire ship's cargo at a generous price. However, he was instructed to make payment when the goods were unloaded. So he offered the ship's captain his ring, that expensive ring he got, as security for the purchase. And of course, the captain was very happy to sell all his good all at once without having to haggle with several other buyers. So the captain of the ship accepted the offer and kept the ring as security. Then the boy did something again. The boy drove a short distance off, set up the tent he had gotten from the caravan traders, and promised a handful of coins to 3 boys if they would help him by acting as his servant. He draped each of them in scraps of fine cloth and gave them the following instruction. They were told to usher into his presence anyone who turned up wanting to see him, but to do so in 3 stages. The first boy was to accompany him up to the door, while the first boy was to escort the visitor into the vicinity of the tent. The second boy was to accompany the visitor to the door, while the third was to usher him into the presence of the boy posing as the rich merchant's son. You see, before long, hundreds of merchants went to the dock to buy goods from the ship, but were told by the captain that his entire cargo had already been sold to the wealthy merchant. So they all fell over one another to reach the boy in his tent, but were made to wait as the servants led them one by one to see the wealthy merchant. He auctioned off all the goods one by one, making each merchant bid against the other to get what he wanted. The process took a long time, and as you might imagine, the merchants were all so eager to acquire the goods that they drove the prices up very high, and very high indeed, that by the end of the day the boy had enough money to pay the captain what he had promised, and had in more than 3 times as much gain for himself. Lastly, the boy returned to his village, married the girl of his dreams, the girl he had loved since childhood, and lived a long and prosperous life. Of course, he used his wealth to help out anyone who was in need, and he was renowned for his generosity, particularly to those who were willing to make something out of their lives. A very interesting story, I might add. So in this story we see a young boy, I would add a resourceful young boy, who looked at situations in a slightly different way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this story as a basis to pull out certain lessons of how to be resourceful. So we're going to go back into our story and look at where the boy started from. So here we have this boy who came across a dead mouse that was lying in the middle of the road. What most people will do will be to look at that sight once and turn away and just move on, or to say, oh, what a shame, another mouse died. But you see, what the boy did was unique. When the boy saw the dead mouse, he wondered how he might turn the mouse's misfortune into some sort of opportunity for himself. One of the ways of being resourceful is to see opportunities, not problems. See a bend in the road, not an end. View things that happen to you as learning curves. You need to develop the mindset of seeing opportunities where other people see problems. This boy looked at the same situation that probably a few people would have passed by and seen that dead mouse and said to themselves, in fact, not even thought about it at all. But in his case, the story says he wondered how he might turn this mouse's misfortune into some sort of opportunity for himself. I dare say that it was because his mind decided to start looking for the opportunities in that situation that made him resourceful in thinking about how he could make some form of gain from that situation. And because he was seeing opportunities and not problems, because he saw a turn, a bend in the road and not an end, because he was saying to himself, how can I learn? How can I gain from this situation? He did not close that chapter, he did not close that case, but he picked up the mouse and brought it to the tavern keeper to feed his cat. Because of course, cats eat mouse or mice. So what happened was that as a reward, the tavern keeper gives the boy a penny. Again, for some, it's a penny. I mean, what could you buy with a penny? You could throw it away, or just spend it on sweets, or spend it on some other thing that would satisfy his immediate needs. Someone once said this to me. He said, if what you have is not enough to meet your needs, then it is not a harvest, it is a seed. Don't eat it, sow it. I'll take that again. If what you have is not enough to meet your needs, it is not your harvest, it is a seed. Don't eat it, sow it, or plant it. Which means, if the resources at your disposal at the moment are not enough to meet the needs that you have, then don't spend those resources. Don't discard them. Look for a way to invest those resources so that they can multiply, and when they multiply, you can now use them to get the things that you want. And this was exactly what this boy did. When he got that penny, he knew it wasn't the harvest that he was pursuing, but it was a means to that harvest. So instead of spending it, he looked around, and you know what he did? He went to the market and bought a small amount of honey. A small amount. Of course, how much could a penny buy? A small amount of honey. But then he went away and he borrowed a large pot of water. And what he did was, because he knew there were flower pickers around working in the sun, he filled the water pot with water and went his way to the flower pickers and offered them water laced with honey. And that was so refreshing. This boy had an idea of where he was heading. Now, in exchange for the water or the honey laced water, he was offered flowers. But you know what? Let me go back to that lesson again. So this guy has just a penny, right? Some would have spent that penny. Some would have just discarded and said, well, all I got was a penny. But again, it goes back to this guy's perception. It goes back to the illustration I gave, that he realizes that this penny is a means to an end, which is why he did not spend it on himself, but he spent it on buying that small bottle of honey. So he exchanged the water, which is free. He adds honey to the water and begins to give it to the flower pickers, and who, out of their gratefulness, gives him flowers. And what does he do with the flowers? Of course, he goes to the market and he sells the flowers. Now he has a handful of pennies. His penny plus his thinking pattern have multiplied the 1 penny that he had into multiple pennies. You see, you need to develop a progressive, or what I call a growth mentality. You need to think about how you can stretch the resources that you have at your disposal in order to get what you want. You need to stop looking at the resources in their present state. You should be looking at them at their potential state. This is how you become resourceful. If you can sing, the question you should... I have the opportunity of counseling people regularly, and people say to me, oh, but all I can do is speak. All I can do is sing. All I can do is take care of old people. All I can do is change nappies. And people... As humans, one of the things I've noticed is that we tend to belittle the skills that we possess as humans as though it's ordinary, as though it's non-essential. And what I usually say to most people when I hear them say this is this: do you realize that there's someone somewhere on earth getting paid loads for what you just talked about that you do? There's someone somewhere who gets paid for changing nappies. There's someone somewhere who gets paid for singing. There's someone somewhere who gets paid for taking care of the elderly. There's someone somewhere who gets paid for reading. There's someone somewhere who gets paid for sleeping on mattresses, testing mattresses. Look, your perception, your mindset about the skills that you have should be, how can I make these skills work for me? Or you could be asking yourself questions like, is there anyone on earth at the moment who is making an income, who is making progress, who is living a fulfilled life with the same set of skills that I have? What have they added to their skills that has made the difference for them? These are the questions that you need to be asking yourself. And these are the questions that I'm sure this guy was unconsciously asking himself. He had a growth mentality to the resources at his disposal. He didn't just want to eat them. He wanted to gather those resources together and make those resources work for him. He wanted to get what he wanted with what he had. So as time went on, this small boy finds himself in another situation. So here there's a mighty wind, and with this wind the king's garden is blown over with wood and twigs and branches falling all over, and the king's gardener is in a fix. He doesn't know what to do because it's a large work to do. It's a really difficult task to undertake. But while he was thinking about this problem, this boy pops up again. Because this boy has trained his mind not to see problems, but to see opportunities. This guy had trained his mind not to see problems, but to see opportunities. So what does he do? He offers to clear every single twig and every single branch away from the king's garden in one day without being paid. He says to the gardener, the only reward that I desire is that I keep the twigs and the branches that I get from this operation. Who would turn down such an offer? Of course, the gardener gladly agrees. But what the boy does next is interesting. So he runs off to the playground where other boys like himself were playing. And what does he do? He offers to pay each of them a penny if they would help him gather up the twigs and the branches and the wood and arrange them by the side of the road. Why? Because he knew, or that small boy knows, that somewhere along the line, someone is going to need those woods. And of course, he pays them with the reward that he got from selling the flowers in the marketplace. Now remember, this boy started with a dead mouse. He has gotten to the stage by just trading with a dead mouse. So, story says that as soon as the last piece of wood was arranged by the side of the road, a porter who walked nearby was looking for fuel to fire his clay pots in the kiln. The boy offered the porter all the wood, and of course the porter wasn't going to get them for free. So not only does he pay the boy handsomely, but he also offers the boy some large pots of water. Again, the boy does not spend the proceeds of this transaction on himself. But you know what he does? He goes and befriends a merchant and a ship captain. But let's go back to that story about how he helped the gardener clear those wood. And this is the idea that I'm going to pull out from there for how to be resourceful. You need to realize that the situation of hardship that some people go through is what other people lean on as a source of income. What do I mean? The problem that you're going through today are answered prayers to those who provide the solutions to those problems. Because you're going to pay them to solve those problems that you have. So some of the things that we discard are actually raw materials for other people. So what if the king's gardener knew that there was a porter in town that would need that wood or those pieces of wood and branches for their business? He would have enjoyed the reward that boy enjoyed. But you see, the difference here was that while the gardener saw that situation as a problem, the boy saw it as a situation to enrich himself. See, by arranging the wood by the side of the road, the boy simply changed the appeal of those pieces of branches and wood from a chaotic item, or from chaotic items to resources or raw materials to be used by households and people in business in need of wood. So let's go on. So the boy goes back to his friends, the merchant, and he realizes, or he gets this information from the merchant that, look, you know what? 500 horses will be heading towards town very soon. One of the ways of being resourceful is cultivating and maintaining worthwhile relationships. Someone once said, make no useless acquaintances. Meeting the right people could expose you to opportunities that you never knew existed. And by being able to leverage on this information and those opportunities, it could set you on a path that would change the trajectory of your life forever. So, what sort of friends or relationships or associations do you have? Or are you making, or are you involved with? Are they the sort of associations or relationships that moves you towards the achievement of worthwhile goals? Or are they situations that take away from you? Are you making investments into people? Or do you have people taking away from you consistently? While it may not be wrong to invest in people, but you need to decide what the returns on your investments should be while you're making those investments. But again, let's go back to the story. So the boy realizes that 500 horses are making their way to town. And what does he do? With a handful of pennies, he goes back and does what? And buys loads of honey this time. Remember, what has worked for you once may likely work again. But this time, he's not targeting flower pickers. He's targeting people who cut grass, who cut hay, food for horses. So not only does he offer them his old formula, water laced with honey, and instead of getting paid with money, he doesn't want money. He wants the product that those people are offering. Hay. So he takes the flour, he takes the hay, loads them onto his wagon, and goes straight to the gates of the city. And as soon as those 500 horses arrive, the owners of those caravans realize that this boy has what they need. Food for their horses. They've been running through desert places where there was nothing for their horses to eat. And what do? They reward him handsomely. They give him a lovely jeweled ring, a fancy tent, and some expensive looking clothes. Now, you would assume that this boy by this time would just settle in and just enjoy himself. But no. Now he goes to his sea captain friend. And from this friend, he realizes that a ship is making its way towards shore with loads of foreign goods. And he knew that as soon as the ship arrives, all the merchants in town will bombard that ship and try to buy the goods from that ship. So what does he do? He crafts a plan. Putting on the expensive clothes he was given, he has enough money to rent a caravan and a driver for just an hour, and he heads towards the port. And as he gets there, he meets the captain of the ship, and offers on behalf of his father, quote and unquote, to buy up every single item on the ship, but on one condition, that payment will be made when the goods are offloaded. And of course, the captain, again, relieved that he doesn't have to go through the haggle of selling to individual merchants, sells everything to the boy, particularly since the boy is offering security with his jeweled ring. So now the boy hatches another plan, based again on the law of demand and supply. He didn't have money to pay for the goods, but by setting up tent and hiring 3 boys to act as his servants, he ushers and is able to get all the merchants in the town into one place and gets them to bid against each other for the limited goods. And by that way, he drives the prices of those goods through the roof. And the story says, at the end of the day, not only does the boy have enough to pay off the ship captain for all the goods, but he has made 3 times as much profit as he would have ordinarily made. This story clearly illustrates how being resourceful, how being able to think differently, how you could look at what others call problems. If you choose to view them as opportunities, they would turn around to work for you. This is how to be resourceful. Here is a boy that started out with a dead mouse. He ended up as a very rich individual. How? He learned to study information in different way. He developed the mindset of a problem solver. He studied his situations and circumstances and refused to look at it from the way or through the eyes of everyone else. He chose to be resourceful about it. As you listen to me today, I'd like to ask you one question. You're going to go back to work tomorrow. For some, you're going to go back to school tomorrow. For some, you're going to go back into those opportunities or into those problems. Here's my counsel. When you get into those places tomorrow, or it might even be today, I need you to take a step back. and ask yourself one question. If this were an opportunity, how would I be thinking about it? If what I'm going through now were actually designed to make me a better person in life, what would be my approach? I guarantee you that by asking questions like this, by knowing the right places to go for help, by knowing who to speak to for help, by knowing what to do, by knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it, by asking the right type of questions, and by identifying the right answers for your situation, you would become one of the most resourceful people in town. And you know, when you're resourceful, what simply happens is that you live a lifestyle that is much more productive and much more rewarding. And as I close, I'd like to say this. Thank you for listening to Paspektives, the show that is designed to take you one step closer to a better life. But as you go into this week, here's what I want you to do. I want you to realize that how you think determines your reality. How you think determines your reality. And until we meet again, same time, same station, I'd like to say thank you for your time and God bless. Bye-bye.
Perspectives. How you think powers your mental views, your actions, and your ultimate reality. Join me, Emmanuel Utomi, every Sunday from 8:30 to 9 p.m. on PRZ 109.2 FM London as we explore how to live your best life possible. Perspectives. How you think. Perspectives. How you think powers your mental views, your actions, and your ultimate reality. Join me, Emmanuel Utomi, every Sunday from 8:30 to 9 p.m. on PRZ 109.2 FM London as we explore how to live your best life possible. Perspectives. How you think.